Biden prepares to address difference with Russia's Putin.
Biden's high-stakes meeting this week in Geneva with Russian President.
COVID-19 threatens Cambodian Danes troops' secret identity.
Twice-weekly performances in Siem Reap, the city nearest the Angkor Wat Temple complex.
Ethiopia holy city reels in Tigray crisis.
Violence that rained down on the city late last year, which locals say killed hundreds of civilians.
Saudi Arabia hedge limited to 60,000 in kingdom. Good evening, TV Education Timor viewers. Come back with me, Dirce Lilifania, on the Voice of America News to deliver the latest news, sharp and reliable with the best reporter from different countries from all around the world, which we summarize in TV Education Timor. VOA and TV Education Timor work together to deliver Voice of America News in Timor-Leste. Well, let's begin the news for today. United States President Joe Biden's summit this week with Russian President Vladimir Putin is expected to focus on improving relations between Washington and Moscow over a host of issues, including cyber attacks from people operation from Russia. Michelle Kuhn reports for VOA.
President Joe Biden's high-stakes meeting this week in Geneva with Russian President Vladimir Putin will address a range of issues, including the jailing of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, whose anti-corruption groups were recently deemed extreme organizations by the Moscow City Court. Both leaders have said that U.S.-Russia relations are at a low point. The timing of the summit is a chance for Biden to see if the countries can have a more predictable, stable relationship. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken issued a warning.
That if Russia chooses to continue to act aggressively, to act recklessly, we'll respond forcefully, as the president's already done.
Biden's agenda will include recent cyber attacks in the United States against food and gas supplies from hackers suspected of being based in Russia. Biden is expected to ask for Russia to extradite suspected hackers to the U.S. Putin told Russia's state TV that Moscow would do so on a condition. Washington agrees to the same thing. About half of all Americans say they trust Biden's ability to negotiate with Putin. According to an ABC Ipsos poll taken earlier this month, some lawmakers question whether Biden should even be meeting with Putin and question whether the U.S. president's steps so far have been tough enough, particularly in response to cyber attacks.
And the president needs to demonstrate with Putin there will be consequences to your actions if you continue to do this. They have been mounting this up in the last just month, and extraordinarily. And I think sanctions are great, but I think it's time to start thinking about hitting back.
The two leaders are expected to talk about other issues, such as regional security, nuclear arms, and the environment. Michelle Quinn, VOA News.
Since the war in Syria broke out a decade ago, refugees have fled to countries in Africa that face instability like Somalia.
Zakaria Azarkan is a Syrian refugee who fled civil war in his homeland 2 years ago to seek opportunities in Somalia, a country that is still recovering from internal conflict. Now, he is chef and manager of Al Warda Al-Shamia, a popular Syrian restaurant in Mogadishu.
I expect other Syrians will find opportunities here and to open new projects, even though Somalia is still emerging from war. There are Syrian dentists who have opened clinics and even other doctors with various specialties who operate medical centers.
Azarkani's restaurant serves as a meeting place for Mogadishu's Syrian community. Recent arrivals to the city come here for orientation. 13-year-old Mohammed Musa and his family arrived in Mogadishu just a few days ago. They dine with Somali locals who are now accustomed to Syrian cuisine.
I urge all Syrian immigrants or even Somalis to come to this restaurant because the food here is irresistible. It feels as if I am back home in my country.
Dr. Mahmoud Saleh is among the Syrian refugee medical professionals offering their healing skills to a country that lost most of its skilled workers to civil war, poverty, and years of lawlessness. Saleh has been in Somalia for the past 4 years and has fully integrated with the local community. The dental surgeon runs one of the best equipped clinics in Mogadishu and is credited for performing safe, successful operations. Saleh says he has settled here with his family.
I now consider myself a Somali citizen through the fact that I have been here for 4 years with my wife and children who are attending Somali schools. We are following the Somali life like other Somali citizens, and my family also considers themselves as Somali.
Syrians who chose to find refuge in Somalia away from their war-torn country may have been driven by the good historical relations between the two countries. In their peace times, both countries shared similar political ideologies. Abdul Wahab Sheikh is a Somali scholar and an expert on international relations and culture.
There has been a long-standing relationship between the two nations that began during the military regime that ruled Somalia and the Ba'ath-led government in Syria. These strong bilateral relations remained, and after Syria became engulfed in civil war, some opted to come to Somalia, where there are no visa restrictions for Syrian citizens.
There is no official data on the number of Syrian refugees living in Mogadishu, and not all are as successful as Azarkan and Saleh. What is clear is that many of these refugees are making a positive contribution to the local economy and culture. Mohammed Sheikh Noor for VOA News, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Turkey's Sea of Marmara is battling an explosion of sea algae dubbed sea snot, which is now threatening an ecological disaster.
A thick, slimy mass is inundating Istanbul's seashores. City beaches, which should be packed with the easing of COVID restrictions, remain empty. Dubbed sea snot, the algae blooming in the Marmara Sea is causing shock and anger among the city's inhabitants. Some blame politicians.
To enter the sea is to commit suicide. Unfortunately, we murdered the Marmara Sea. The governments did this.
I was born and raised in Istanbul 76 years, and this is the first time we let the polluted rivers and the sewage ruin the sea.
Turkey has witnessed its naturally occurring mucilage before, but never on this scale. Scientists blame rising sea temperatures and nitrate-rich pollution for fueling the algae growth that causes the slime. Oceanographer Professor Jamal Saidam devoted 20 years to studying the Marmara Sea.
Maybe it's the first time among the Turkish scientists that the cause of this thing is unanimously decided. It's the man-made effect. When I say man-made, it's all population, industry, agriculture, so all those activities somehow ends up in the Sea of Marmara.
The government is desperately trying to clear up the so-called sea snot in the face of growing criticism over Marmara Sea pollution levels. The mountainous task cannot come soon enough for Istanbul's fishermen, who now spend much of their time on shore, counting the cost.
As fishermen, we have started suffering from this terribly. Now many fishermen cannot take bread home because of this. It is bad both for line fishing and net fishing. The net fishing is impossible because they can't throw and lift the net through the snot. While fishing with lines, the line gets caught in the sea snot. If we used to make 10 lira, now we make 2. It affected all of us so badly.
But with sea temperatures rising at the onset of summer, further fueling the sea algae growth, Fears are growing the sea snot will spread to Turkey's tourist resort in the neighbouring Aegean Sea. Turkey is now in a race against time in its battle against the sea of slime. Dorian Jones of VOA News, Istanbul.
Saudi Arabia announced Saturday this year Hajj pilgrimage will be limited to no more than 60,000 people, all of them from within the kingdom due to ongoing coronavirus pandemic. In past years, pilgrims and tourists have flocked to Aksum, a holy city in the Tigray region of Ethiopia.
For Ethiopian Orthodox Christians, more than 40% of the country's population and most of the people in the Tigray region, Aksum is the holiest city in the world. They believe it to be home to the Ark of the Covenant, or original Ten Commandments, and the birthplace of Ethiopian Christianity.
I come to church to receive forgiveness. God will protect the Ark.
But after more than 7 months of war, many worshippers here are displaced families from the countryside. War victims continue to flood the hospital.
We were doing construction work, filling concrete columns when the building was bombed, and I was hit by shrapnel in this leg, and then again in this one.
Hospital administrators say besides those injured from battles, mortality rates in the region are going up because healthcare centers are damaged and or looted, and many roads to hospitals in the main cities are cut. Aksum residents say sporadic violence continues as businesses slowly reopen.
If we do not open our shops, we may die from hunger. Things are changing in this war. People used to flee cities for the country, but now displaced people are coming here, and we have to take care of them. We have to open to survive.
Many businesses were looted in the extreme violence that rained down on the city late last year, which locals say killed hundreds of civilians. And fighting continues between soldiers of the Ethiopian Defense Forces and the Tigray People's Liberation Front, or TPLF. Eritrean soldiers are fighting in support of the federal military, and both sides have militias in the fray. The violence began in November 2020, when TPLF forces attacked federal military bases in Tigray, and Ethiopian forces swept through the region. Thousands have been killed, and millions have been displaced. And while the government says Tigray is in the process of recovering, many locals say their security and economic situation are deteriorating. Heather Murdoch, VOA News, Aksum, Ethiopia.
For 14 years, a Khmer classical dance troupe in northern Cambodia has distinguished itself with its embrace of spiritual, but the impact of the coronavirus pandemic may end spiritual identity.
For most of their lives, these young Cambodian dancers have spent 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, learning, rehearsing, and refining the nation's classical dance and music. Born and trained near Cambodia's iconic 12th century temple of Angkor Wat, these sacred dancers of Angkor pray and meditate every day.
The sacred dancers of Angkor are children born in the land of Angkor. They're born around the temples from poor villagers, and with a very humble background. So it is fitting for them to serve the spirit of the temple.
Ravin Karet Coxon created the Preriam Bopa TVE dance school in 2007. Located 2 kilometers from Bontisrai Temple, the dance school aims to revive Cambodia's cultural and spiritual legacy.
Performers and musicians here embrace very strict discipline. We are the only spiritual dance troupe in Cambodia. We had offered dedication and dance rituals to the spirits and deities in 42 Cambodian ancient temples.
Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the dance troupe lost its only source of income, which came from its twice-weekly performances in Siem Reap, the city nearest the Angkor Wat Temple complex. Without the monthly receipts of $4,000, the 25 dancers and musicians may also lose their sacred identity.
The sacred dancers who had since 14 years not broken the spiritual thread in praying and in meditating every day for the peace in the world, for all the children in the world. They embrace a spirituality that if you stop and you tell them, okay, now we have to close the school, we have to close the conservatoire, and then you come back when everything is okay, they will come back as normal dancers. But the spiritual thread will be broken forever.
Karet Coxon moved to Europe in 1970, 5 years before the communist Khmer Rouge regime took over Cambodia and killed some 1.7 million people in the late 1970s. Among those murdered were most of the country's artists, musicians, dancers, and educated Cambodians. The regime's savagery put Cambodia at risk of cultural extinction. Karet Coxon first returned to Cambodia in 1992 and 2 years later founded the British charity the Ngin Karet Foundation for Cambodia. The organization helps over 2,800 village families who live within the Angkor complex, among them the sacred dancers of Angkor. During the pandemic, she and her husband have been supporting the troupe with their own money while trying to raise funds for the dancers.
You have to also remember that Angkor Wat is listed as UNESCO treasure. But the classical dance is also listed as UNESCO treasure. So what we're doing, we're linking the 2 UNESCO treasure in the heart of our cultural heritage. This is very powerful. If I could find 4,000 persons who would give $1 a month till the tourism resume, we'll be okay.
Chatra Chap for VOA News, Washington.
TV Education Timor viewers, this information at the same time concluding our meeting for today's section. I'm Derseli Lifania on behalf of the crew on Dati. Step back from your face, have a good night and see you next time.